Welcome to Day 2 of DynamicsCon. Thank you to all of our sponsors for making this event free to our community. Get ready to skill up with our Dynamics and Power Platform superheroes. Be sure to stick around after the sessions to participate in our networking breakout rooms.
Would you like a free EAM for your Business Central? With Dynaways EAM for BC, you will be able to get an overview of all of your assets and work orders. You will be able to set up preventive maintenance sequences periodically or based on the state of your assets. You will be able to see all work orders on one screen, and your workers will be able to access work orders assigned to them or to their team through their tablets or mobile devices. When done with the task, they will be able to post consumption with a click of a button. All of this and much more directly built into Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. And best of all, we offer a fully functioning free version that you can install into your BC in a couple of minutes. In the description above this video, you can click on See More, get more information from our website, watch a short tutorial on YouTube on how to get the free license, or check it out on AppSource.
Please welcome our first speakers of the day. Here in the Business Central track, Robb Delprado, a senior trainer and consultant, and Kerry Peters, CEO of New View Strategies. Today, they will be presenting their session, Whip It Good. Please stick around after their session for a live Q&A.
Hello, everybody. I'm Robb Delprado from New View Strategies, and I'm excited to be presenting for DynamicsCon today. And with me is Kerry Peters. Kerry?
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. We love being able to present sessions at DynamicsCon, and we're excited to answer your questions in the chat during this recorded session when it's presented live during the conference. I'm really excited for you to hear what Robb has to say because he's the expert all about jobs and job planning. And today we're going to talk about Whip It Good, a tragic comedy.
So Kerry, you know, with these virtual presentations, it's not like the old days where you were up there and everybody could interact with you. So I'm treating this more like a script or a play. And that's why I put in that little subtitle there. Jobs is one of those functionalities that has a lot of great uses. And I've had a lot of fun with it, which is where the comedy comes into play. Two of my favorite implementations, one had to do with a rental company. They built generators that they would then turn into the rental fleet. So they had a whole kit that they would acquire. They would put the parts in through the job journal, but they purchased it first and then implemented or used the purchase invoice to apply them to the job. And then the time was actually posted to the job. And then when it was all said and done, they made a slight modification to the job. They didn't bill to the customer. They actually posted the acquisition cost to the fixed asset. And then it was part of their inventory or the rental fleet. So that's one example of it. But another one, which is in a completely different environment, I worked with a staffing company and they hired for other companies, professionals like engineers and accountants. And they would set up jobs, and then the people that they send out to those jobs would send in their time cards, and they would post their time to the job and then turn around and bill the job to the customers. So again, an example of using it for billing to a customer and an example of just having it for internal uses. You know, that's one of the great things about Business Central, Nav, and Navision. And I wonder today how many times I'll say Nav or Navision, but the flexibility and being able to do things in many different ways is one of the great things I love about Business Central.
And I really love the real world experience you bring to presentations like this, Robb. The idea that you can share some of those experiences with different customers who have used this for a good long time in their businesses, and that you can share that with the group today is incredible. So
Kerry, one of the things I find is that, you know, if you give me a job to do, I need to break it down into my smaller pieces. And so what we're going to see today is how you break that down so that you can actually learn how to set the job up right, then post to the job and review the job. And again, if you get the setups right, the posting to the jobs and the review to the job is that much easier. Again, the hard part is just getting it set up right. And I've seen so many times where I've come in where people had tried to use it, and it's like, well, we didn't have this, we didn't have that, we're getting these errors. Why do we get that? And again, it has to do with how you do your setups. So that's the first thing we're going to do today, is look at our table of contents. So again, I look at this as a play or a script. And again, if you follow through, these are the things you've got to do to get complete from start to finish with the job. And notice there's 2 chapters here. The first 2 chapters, the components of the job and the role center, those are part of your setups. So most of this presentation is around setups. Everything else, if you get everything else set, the posting to the job and the reviewing and posting of WIP are a piece of cake. So setting up a job, we're going to look at the job card for a moment. And that's really the start. Kerry, I look at the job card as the header of a document. You know, in the header of a document, if you put in who you're billing to and all your dimensions and all your setups, you actually flow through right to the document, and there are no posting errors. Here today, you see some key fields out here, but again, everything we fill out on the header is going to go down onto the job tasks and the planning lines. I've got a bill to customer out here. And then I've got a couple of key people out here. I've got the person responsible and the project manager. In my previous experience, and if you go out to Business Central and you do some research, they're going to tell you that the system will generate the job number for you. But I've got lots of folks who don't want to use the system generated number. For instance, that company that built the generators, they wanted to have the fixed asset number that they were actually going to be converting. So you can assign your own number. Now, the other thing was, for those people who were the staffing company, they tried to tie the bill to customer into the job number so that when somebody who was looking at it, they wanted to see, well, which bill to customer, they matched up the job number to the bill to customer, and they were able to keep things in sync. It helped when they got new people in. And that's some of the choices you get to make. The flexibility of the system, Kerry, is just, it's phenomenal.
So Rob, I know that one of the examples you gave was of somebody doing an internal project. So what if you didn't have a customer to bill to?
And see, again, the flexibility of the system. I'm going to give some options here. And obviously with the people who built the generators, they didn't bill to somebody else. They had an internal customer. Now, some people don't want to use the internal customer because they're worried about, somebody might pick that for something else. But the job card is looking for a bill to customer, and you can set up an internal customer and prevent people from posting to that by, when you set up a new customer posting group, just don't put a GL account out there. The system is going to ask you to put in a bill to customer with a customer posting group, but it isn't trying to test the posting at that point. So if you don't put a customer posting group in with a GL account number, you're going to prevent people from picking the wrong customer. Now, Kerry, on that same subject, and again, going back to flexibility, the customer can be set up with a payment method code, and that payment method code can have a GL account on there. So if you're doing internal jobs, let's say you're doing maintenance on a building and you want to put your time in there, you can bill to your customer, your internal customer, and then when you post WIP down the road, it's actually going to go ahead and go to the GL account for that customer, the payment method code when you bill them. So, there's a lot of functionality out there behind the scenes that people don't even think about. And by the way, I've got 2 other fields down there that are really, you don't have to use those unless you have certain things set up. So notice that person responsible out there. If you're using time journals or timesheets, and I'm not a big proponent of that because that's extra steps, but if you do want to post time to the job through a timesheet, you have to have somebody who is responsible for this job. And in this case, that individual would be the resource you've assigned to this job. And then that project manager, we're going to get into that later on when we talk about the role center, but that's pretty critical if you want to see somebody see your jobs all in one place. And Kerry, I've also pointed out off to the right, you see some of the statistics for this job card. Notice in the job number, and then right below that, I have a resource with a 1, but I don't have an item or a GL with any numbers on that. You can set up specific pricing for a resource or an item for that specific job. And in the example that I used earlier for the staffing company, we had people who might have crossed jobs. They might have been in one company, but they were also transferable to another job. And so we might have had different pricing based on the job. So again, you can set up the price for the resource on a job by job basis. So again, flexibility in how you can use the system. And this is just the first tab of the job card. So here you see, this is critical. And by the way, I'm skipping over the task lines because remember, the task lines are more like your sales lines of your documents. So again, if I'm filling out the information up front, I don't have to worry about going back in later on down the road. We've got 4 statuses on a job. We've got the planning, we've got a quote, the open and complete. And you can only post to a job that has an open status. Now, the other thing you need if you are going to be posting WIP, and by the way, just because you have this out here doesn't mean you have to post WIP. So you don't have to have a WIP job posting for this, but if you do want to, you have the option to set up multiple posting groups. And I might give a suggestion here where you've got a long-term job, so you want WIP to go to one set of GL accounts, and you got a short-term job where you want WIP to go to a different set of GL accounts. And then if you are posting WIP, you get to pick the WIP method you want. And then down below, you see how much detail that WIP posting method, that tells you whether you want the details or you want to post per job. And if you're going to post detail, you're going to get a lot of transactions out there. So I always encourage people to post just per job. And then you see a couple other fields that are kind of helpful for you. The apply usage link, I'm skipping over that other one for a moment, but the apply usage is kind of handy. If you've got people who are posting documents out there, purchase orders, or they're creating stuff, you can actually have them link. They do a lookup on the document to the actual planned budget line. And that way people might be able to avoid errors. They can click and see what job task lines they've got that they want to post to. That other field that's out there, and I've done a lot of research on this, turning it on or turning it off, I haven't found it has had any impact on me at all. So I just turn it on, and that way I can use it to my advantage.
Rob, when I look at this, posting group and WIP method look pretty much the same to me. What's the difference between those two fields?
Which?
The posting group and the WIP method.
So a posting group allows you to drive when you're posting WIP. It allows you to set up the WIP cost and the deferred revenue accounts for the job. WIP method is how you are going to calculate WIP. And so you see here, I've got the standard or the golden standard for WIP method. That's the percent of completion. And if you're a US GAAP company, unless you have some special certifications, you are required to post WIP under the percent of completion for long-term contracts. But you also have completed contract. I've had a few clients who've used a completed contract for short-term contracts. They just want to have everything at the end of a month or the end of a quarter in one GL account. Now, BC also gives you 3 other and there's system configured methods. Now, I'm not big into something outside of standard accounting. So you've got your sales value, your cost value, and cost of sales. And those are all system configured that do a little bit different calculation for WIP. Now, I will also tell you, Kerry, that again, the system is so flexible, they give the user the opportunity to configure their own WIP method. But again, if you're following standard US GAAP methods, I don't know why you would do something other than percent of completion. And again, I've had people, like I said, under certain circumstances use the completed contract, but you do get some different options out there. And as I said earlier, you might want to have different posting groups based on the cost WIP method that you're using or whether or not it's a long-term or short-term contract. On the duration tab there, this is simply informational. It doesn't matter what date you put in there. The job planning lines are actually going to determine your start and your ending dates. And we'll see that later on when we get the tasks and the job planning lines. At this moment, I'm not going to talk about the foreign trade tab. There is a foreign trade tab if you're dealing with companies who deal with currencies other than your own. And then later on, we're going to get to WIP and recognition tab, and I'll cover that in detail when we go to calculate WIP. So now that we've got the job card set up, now we have the task lines. And if you're not used to using BC and you come in here and you go, oh man, this looks like it's going to be a pain. I only see 2 or 3 lines at a time, and I'm not going to be able to get this done as quickly as I would like. So if you see off to the right, Kerry, that star, that's the focus mode. And that is a really useful tool. But before I explain what that is, I want to point out some of the other great features of BC. Notice I've got the general tab collapsed, and I've got the posting tab collapsed, and I got my duration tab collapsed. When I'm looking at the job card and I want to see certain things, I don't want to have all the tabs open all at once because I can't see much. So notice I've been able to configure the tabs to show the key fields that I want. So you have the option out there to select fields that you want to show when compressed. So in this case, I know I'm looking at and I see my description up there for the conference room. I see the customer, and I see the resource responsible for this. And then down below my posting tabs, I see some other key fields that I have chosen to display when I've got this collapsed. But that said, let's go ahead and see what happens if we click that focus mode. This is what I love. The ability to actually see all of my task lines. Now, I've already entered these in, but what I would have had here is a bunch of blank space to key in all of these individual tasks. And I'm going to state here that back in the day, in the older versions of Nav and Navision, you had to click on the button to go down into the phases, into the tasks, and the steps. And you never saw all that readily available on some of the older versions. Now, we've eliminated the phase, but you can use that with these job task types. Notice I've got a planning phase, and down below I've got installation, and I've broken that all out. So that kind of gives me the ability, even though I'm only dealing with task lines, to segregate those task lines by the individual phases. And then, you know, I get the tasks by drilling into, or the steps, sorry, for each task by drilling in and adding the planning lines. But again, this all becomes available because of the focus mode.
Yeah, I love that focus mode. They've made that available in so many useful places, and it really addresses the complaint that we've often heard where we have customers say, well, I have this much room to be able to enter my information into the screen, and this just makes the entire screen available within a single click. So it's a fantastic feature. I had one question about this with the task lines. Are you able to use copy and paste or edit in Excel to populate this instead of doing it manually?
You know, I haven't tried the edit in Excel on this piece. I have in the job planning lines. So again, I will tell you this. I had a client who they used to have like over 100 lines, maybe a couple hundred lines for their tasks. And we actually used Rapid Start. They built them in Excel, and then we built a Rapid Start package to actually import them in. And that was really great because, again, they had huge budgets in Excel.
Yeah, fantastic. That'd be a great solution for those larger, more complex jobs.
So on my planning line, and again, same situation, I drilled in. Remember, you could have closed that focus mode now and then gone up to the job header and clicked on the planning line. But, you know, I'm right there on my task line. I drilled right on in. It focused on the line that I drilled into. So that happened to be the first line here. But if I want to continue on, I just click that little filter that you see in the task number field, and I clear my filter, and suddenly I'm in there without having to close out of my task lines that I had open. Again, the choice is, do I want to drill in from my task line, or do I want to go up, close all the tasks that I had, and go back into my planning line? Again, the flexibility and how you want to use the system really impresses me. And that just continues year after year as they continue to add features. So now that I've got all my planning lines in, here you see it, I have budget lines and billable lines. Now, I also have the option, I could have put in a budget and billable line, but in this case, this is a perfect situation or perfect budget for fixed fee. So here I have a bunch of tasks that I'm going to be doing, and then I have one task that I'm eventually going to bill out. If I were a time and material type of company where I was billing out for services, I would probably have it set up for both, where I was billing, I was budgeting for their time and billing for their time. But again, I'm going to share something else that's out here. You don't have to. I know if you go out to the Microsoft or the Business Central documentation, it says that you have to have task lines and budget lines. But I will tell you, you can skip the budget line if you're just posting directly into the task. So again, you don't have to have a budget, but again, it's a good idea to have one to start planning.
So you could have just a billable line for that, Rob, and then your budget is for comparison, right?
Yes, exactly. But again, I could, if I were just posting for time and material, I could just post it out there as an actual to be billed, and that would be fine. So here is the job card with the budget. Again, something that I love is being able to, we've got it compressed. All I see now is my planning line. Now, obviously, if I've got a bigger budget and everything like that, I might want to filter the task lines for just the end totals. But again, now this is a nice, simple job that we've got set up. We're going to start it. And again, remember what I told you. It's not the duration tab that decides when the job starts and when it ends. It's these planning lines that I put in there. And I see that my initial meeting is on February 3rd, and down below my final billing is going to be March 12th. So again, these are what really control what's going to happen here. And again, going back to the planning lines for a second, those planning lines, whether I've set it up as budget or budget and billable or just billable, those drive some of the functionality about how the system is going to treat a transaction and how I'm going to calculate WIP. So again, for percent of completion, I'm going to be looking at my total cost, my budgeted cost, and then I'm going to be comparing that to what I've actually completed that's out there. So from the stats, and again, this is really nice. This is part of the job card, and I get to suppress that if I want to. You see the little I that's up there next to the details. There's also that I in the ribbon of the job card. So I can toggle between showing the details or the stats here or just hiding it. And then the other thing is that I like about the job card is back in the day, you had to either hit F9, depending on which version you were on, or F7 to see the stats. Here, you have that option by just clicking on that option to display your stats. And I want to take a moment, and I'll probably say it again later on, but my total budget for this job is $13,554.11. That's my budget. That's what's going to be driving me later on when I calculate WIP. And then I also see right here that I'm going to be making about $10,000 on this job. So again, I can see my profitability beforehand, before I start working on it. And that's what I'm going to be driving for. So now we've got this job completed or quoted, if you will, and I could, if I wanted to, send out a quote from the job. Back in the day, and I will tell you that another thing I love about the way Microsoft handles their product is they take customer requests for features. Back in the day, you used to be able to bill from the job or from the sales invoice. You could get job usage, or you could set up and post to the job from the sales invoice. I would love to be able to see us go back and post the sales invoice directly to the job again, because then maybe what I would do is set up a sales quote that mirrored what I had in the job and be able to send a real quote with all the things I wanted the customer to see from my job quote. Now, I will tell you, depending on how much detail and how much billable work you've got out there, if it's billable, it's going to show up on this quote. I just like the idea of having a sales quote be the document that I'm quoting from. So we've completed the setup for the job, and now we should be able to post. But here's the thing. I have one more setup out here that can really help me. This really makes or breaks how well I can control what I do. And I will tell you, some of my earlier jobs when I was working with Nav and Navision, I wish we had a role center back then. So this is the project manager role center. This is all I need to help me manage my jobs. First of all, I have access to all the key stuff that I want to see. I've got, if I'm going to be creating purchase orders, I can do that from here. If I've got timesheets I need to set up, I can see that. I've got my notifications. I could see all jobs. See up in the left in my ribbon, I see that I've got jobs. But also because I've set myself up as the project manager on that job. Remember, that was one of those key fields I set on the job card. I see my specific jobs that I'm responsible for. And down below the very bottom, when you see job 80, that was the one that we were looking at a little earlier. So it allows me to filter on my jobs, but it also gives me access to all the things I need to do. And Kerry, all those queues up there, they're geared for my jobs. I see that I have a couple of invoices that are due to be created. I have 10 that are past due to be created. I see some WIP hasn't been posted. I don't have any completed jobs, but I also see I have one job that's over budget. And how cool is that to be able to say, oh, wow, I've got a job I really got to look at. And that's really what you want to be doing.
Absolutely. When I look at this role center, if there's any one thing that you all take away from this presentation today, it's to select this role center if you are somebody who is managing jobs for your organization. Of course, all the stuff that Rob has gone over with setup is absolutely essential for having this work correctly. But the role center, in my opinion, really dictates how efficiently you can use these on a day-to-day basis as you're moving forward in your use of jobs. And I'm really impressed with what they've put on this particular role center that is usable and relevant to the daily things that somebody would want to keep track of as they're utilizing jobs to do their work. So this particular role center, I love that you highlighted that as part of this presentation, Rob, because it's incredibly useful.
Well, and again, Kerry, the other thing that, again, Microsoft does for us is gives us the ability to personalize it. So if there's certain things you're not using, you can hide some of these cues. You know, I mentioned that I'm not a big proponent of the timesheets. Now, you do see I've set some stuff up so you can see them. But, you know, if I'm not going to be managing somebody's timesheets, I don't need to see those cues. I have more real estate I can play with. And the other thing it gives me is, notice I get graphs. There are more graphs out here. I just showed you one of the simple graphs that we've got, but those are my jobs only. I'm focusing only on my stuff. Now, if I'm responsible for everything, you know, then I've got a lot more clutter on my pages. But again, I get to focus on what my jobs are. I'm making my job easier. And Kerry, it's all about the setup. Once you get beyond this, now things are just going to start flowing. So we've done the first two chapters. We've got the setups for the job and we've got the setup for the role center. So now it's time to start posting to a job. And that's really easy because we don't have a lot of choices. So our posting options, I've got time that I can post and I've got material that I can post. I can use time journals or I can use job journals. And I can also use posted purchase documents. And I do that for both my material and my resources, although I can't use the time journal for material, but I can do the job journals and the purchase invoices. So let's go back to the time journal for a moment. I have to get that approved before I can actually use it. So if somebody is posting to the job, I've got to have somebody post the time, then they have to be approved. And those things are all extra steps that I see as being able to be done with just manual entries. I allow people to post, right? If I can post them to time journals, how come I can't let them post directly to the job? But again, a little extra level of control that you might have there.
Rob, can you give some examples of when you would use the GL accounts? Because I'm not clear on that.
So I'm going to tell you that now that BC has stepped forward and allows you to buy a resource, that would have been the only reason I would have seen that you could have used the GL accounts. Now, that's a newer feature, but I will tell you that's not something new to me. Over the years, I've recommended modifications for my clients to make it easy for them to purchase a resource on a GL, on a posted document instead of using the GL account. Because how many times do our users really know what GL accounts we want them to post to? If you tell them that there's a resource out there for job supplies, they know job supplies. I'm going to buy a job supply. Or if they're going to buy outside labor, they know they're buying outside labor. They're putting a purchase order in for that. They're not going to know that GL account 52551 is for, outside labor or job our GL account 71113 is for job supplies. This way, by buying a resource, you've got all your mappings behind the scenes, and it makes it easy for the user to do that. But again, it's new to BC. It's not something that was new to me. I love that idea from way back in the day. So
Yeah,
I would encourage people not to use GL accounts.
I absolutely agree. We see that a lot in the finance area and other areas where people post things to the GL accounts directly, and they lose a lot of the really great functionality that's designed into the system so that you don't have to do that.
So I'm going to give you one other reason why you probably don't want to use GL accounts. And that comes back to they still are making improvements to the job area, I will say. If you want to budget for a GL account, you're going to get an error message if you do not have a product posting group on the GL account when you go to budget. But then when you go to run WIP, it's going to say you can't have the product posting group on the GL account. So it kind of contradicts itself. And again, if you get away from using the GL account, you never run into that problem. So pulling time, I mentioned, if you're using time, you can pull it from the time journal. Or now here's a real cool feature. If you've budgeted for time, meaning you've got resources out there on the job like I did earlier, you have two options. If I posted time, I can click the prepare option in my ribbon of the job journal and say suggest lines from the timesheet. And if I've got a budget out there, I can say, hey, calculate my remaining usage. Now, obviously, when you calculate remaining usage, you probably want to put some extra filters out there, like the tasks or the dates that you're pulling from. But again, you get some options where you don't have to manually key this stuff. Or, you can skip both of these and go ahead and manually enter the time from for the resources. Now, if I'm pulling time from a time sheet, I've got to do some extra setups here. So I have this resource out here that I'm requiring fill a timesheet out. And it says that right there. If I don't have that slid over to enabled, he can't post to a timesheet. And then the other thing is I have to have a timesheet owner and somebody who's going to approve those timesheets. Here's the other thing. If I've got this guy using timesheets and I want to manually post his time on a job journal for another job that he isn't posting to, I have to turn this off. So again, there's some extra setups if you want the control, but remember, you always have to use the timesheet unless you go back and adjust this individual again. So again, I'm not a big proponent of timesheets, but again, if you want to control it and have a little extra layer on there, you can certainly use the timesheet. So going back to that job journal where I was calculating the remaining usage for that particular job, I want to point something out here, and I'm hoping that this will be one of those features they add later on. Notice in my job filter, I've got the number and there's a little drop down. In the task number field, that's not a drop down. You have to know the task numbers you want to put in there. I'm guessing when they were designing this, they thought, well, you're going to grab all your tasks. But they do have the option to fill it out or filter it. And I do want to point out that this is something you have to manually key in there. That's not something you can look up. So when I do that suggest time from my budget, calculate the remaining usage here, it pulls in all the resources that were budgeted for those tasks. And then I can go ahead and post this time journal or this job journal.
Rob, I noticed on your sheet there, you've got a star for line type, but you have that blank. So what is that? Why do you leave that blank there?
So that's a great question because a lot of people get confused about this. That line type, you have three choices: budget, billable, or budgeted and billable. And people would say, oh, I'm going to fill that out because it's a billable, or I'm going to put it in as the budget. Well, if you've already got a budget out there, you don't want to use that. You want to leave this blank. And I will tell you this too, and maybe this is a feature that's going to be improved upon. Even if I put in billable, meaning there's no budget in here, it's going to go back and it's going to update my budget on my job line. So again, I would encourage folks that unless you know what you're doing with that budget, and by the way, if I'm controlling my job, I don't want anybody messing with my budget. So I would hide that field from folks. Might even consider taking it right off the page. But again, if you use that field, it is going to update the job itself, the budget. Now, I'm not going to show you this yet. We're going to go ahead and leave this hanging for a moment. We'll come back and look at what happens when we post this in a moment. So now my other option here is using purchase orders or purchase invoices to update the job. And again, remember, now we can go ahead and post resources on the purchase order or the purchase invoice. But I want to point something else out here. Posting my purchase order is a receipt. If I put a purchase invoice in, I have to post the invoice itself. So receiving something does not update the job. This would create, and I'm just going to skip right ahead for a second, but you see that I've got a job number and a task number that I'm assigning these items to. And notice I've got a quantity to receive here. If I go to the next slide, I see that I've received these. When I receive these, all the system is doing is posting the receipt of the inventory. And then immediately, because it's posting to a job, it isn't really posting the job. It's posting an inventory adjustment. There is nothing, if you were to look at the job now and looked at the job ledger entries, there are no transactions created by posting this purchase receipt. And I've talked to some folks at Microsoft about this, because if you remember, if you're using an older version of Nav or Navision, it used to post the receipt to the job. A posted receipt would post to the job. But the problem they ran into was when you ran WIP, remember, a posted purchase receipt is just posting expected cost. So later on, it would have to true up the cost. But if you've run WIP on the expected cost versus the actual cost, WIP got screwed up. And they acknowledged that, and they decided that they didn't have an immediate fix. And I think the last version where you actually could post the purchase receipt directly to the job was NAV 2009. So they've gone quite a distance without having any posting directly to the job. So you have to remember, if you're using purchase orders out here, that receipt is something you may have to accrue for depending on how you want to track it. Kerry, I'm going to give you something that's a little bit, progressive thinking. What I've done with some clients is I've had them post the inventory to a location with a bin specified for that job. And that way we can issue from the bin directly to the job, getting the right costs on the job. And that way, when everything is said and done, when I'm done with my job, I should be able to go out and run inventory evaluation for that bin and see that I have nothing left. That's one way to control the inventory that I'm buying. Gives a little bit of extra insight.
Yeah, that's a fantastic tip. I love that, because you're really just using a different part of the system to organize your job.
Yes. And it could be a job, simply the bin could be tied to this job, and then you can block that later on, or you can keep reusing that bin for next job and next job and next job. But again, you always want to make sure that bin is closed before you start using it again.
Yeah, what a great control to really keep track of things.
So we had options out there. We've talked about posting time to the job, and we've talked about posting material to the job. So now what do we do? Well, remember, the setups were the hard part. We're now controlling our posting, and now we're going to review the job. So the first thing we want to review, remember I posted the time from that job journal, and you see out here now that I've got actual costs to my budgeted costs. And because I posted from the cost not consumed yet, I'm going to be identical on this piece. If people were posting time manually, you might see some variances out there. The other thing is, notice I'm going to point out I have not billed anything yet. I'm past due on the billing, but I haven't billed it at this moment. So now remember, it's calculated what my WIP is at this point, what percent it is complete. I told you before that it was based on my total cost. Well, I've only put in a certain percent right now, and the system has calculated that I'm only 31.42%. And I also want to point something else out here. That 31.42 is a rounded number. First time I tested this in BC and I went to calculate what WIP should have been, I was like, why am I so far off? And far off, I was like a couple $100 off on like a couple 100,000. But it's because that percentage is rounded to two decimals. But in actuality, behind the scenes, it's out to 6 decimals. So the actual calculation carries itself out that far when it's posting the real numbers that are out here. So now I'm ready to look at reports that are out here. And there are some great reports. Actually, I like this first report myself, but remember, all these reports can also be sent to Excel. So when I'm viewing them, and that's another improvement that's come along over the years, is you used to be able to have to just print them to PDF and then print them out to a piece of paper and take a look at them. Now, all these reports can be sent to Excel. So the job analysis report, that's the one I like the most because you get to select. You can pick budgeted, usage, billable, and even invoiced. I didn't put that on here, but you can pick those 4 different categories for the cost, for the price, and for profit. And again, as I said, you can export that to Excel and be looking at this in detail. Down below, these other ones tend to be more stagnant. So my job planning lines, I can again export that to Excel and take a look at that and see where I'm at on my budget. My actual to budget cost, again, that's just actual to budget. That doesn't have anything to do with my invoices. And then actual to budget price. Going back, I still like that first first report I was just talking about. The other thing is, before you run WIP at the end of a month or at the end of a quarter, it's a good idea to go ahead and run the suggest billings. Because if you remember on that last job I was just looking at, I hadn't run the billing yet, even though it was due to be billed in February. And here we are at the end of the month, and it's now set to, it should have been billed. And then the other report that's out there is my job cost transaction details report, which is give me everything on that job. And I get to filter for each job I want, or I can filter on my jobs or the people who are responsible for those jobs. So posting WIP, I can go ahead now. Remember, I do have some issues that I'm going to be addressing or catching, but I wanted to point out that now would be a time that we could be running our WIP. And WIP is in 2 phases. First of all, you calculate WIP, and this is calculated WIP. And now we're going to take a look at that WIP and recognition tab. So out here, I have calculated WIP. And as I told you before, that number out there, the 7,227.44, that's the WIP sales account. That is actually the 31.49% of my 23,000 that I was looking at as revenue out there. And I now see my profit percent is 41.07. And that is based on the actual of the budget. So if I were to calculate my profit percent of the 23,000 versus the 13,55411, that would be the 41.7%. So again, I've now calculated WIP, but notice down below, there's a right side that says I posted to WIP. And I also want to take a moment. Those, if you look off to the right in the details here, or my stats, notice that in actual costs, the only thing I'm seeing here are the resource time because I posted to the job from the job card or the job journal. But here, my item, remember I posted a purchase receipt, nothing has happened on that side of it yet. I haven't posted the purchase invoice. So at this point, I've calculated WIP, and now I'm really doing a fine-tooth comb here. I have a couple of options. I can decide, well, wait a minute, that revenue, that's not material. I'm just going to let it ride. I'm going to leave it and post it to WIP. So I can go ahead at this point and post it into my WIP account. However, one of the nice pieces about what's gone on here is I can't tell you, Kerry, how many times in the past people said, oh, I posted WIP and I forgot a transaction that's out here. And then it becomes a matter of, well, how do I make that adjustment? Do I make some contra posting into the job that I have to then reverse later on? Or do I go out to the GL account and make a reversing entry out there? Well, now one of the options when you go to post WIP, remember I've calculated WIP. I did the first step was calculate WIP. Now I went to post it. If I posted it and I want to reverse it, I have the option to reverse the WIP. Really nice feature there, Kerry. I can't tell you how many people have said, wow, that's a really nice feature.
That's got to be real popular with your accountants, knowing that they can close that out at month end and still have a few options left.
So, Kerry, we've taken them from the basic setups all the way through to posting. They can see the issues they have if they're using a posted document. And by the way, Kerry, you asked me about a GL account. Even if I posted a purchase receipt for a GL account, that's not going to hit my job. I actually have to post the invoice. So we've seen the pitfalls of that. I would encourage folks to receive the inventory into a location and issue from the location to the job, because then you're going to get your costs updated in a timely manner. And people are responsible for those locations then. So, Kerry, I've completed it. I'm looking forward to some folks maybe piping up with some questions. But I'm going to turn it over to you and let you wrap it up.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for the presentation today on jobs. Everybody, hope you have some questions for Rob in the chat as we finish out the hour. I just wanted to point out very quickly, we've got some free resources available for you. The links to all of them are in our slide deck and available here. We'll be putting those links in the chat as well. Our self-assessment scorecard will let you see how much of your system you're utilizing or not. We've got our full agenda of classes and a whole ton of videos out on our YouTube channel. And just for DynamicsCon, we've got a drawing going on for a free hour of time with our BC and NAV experts like Robb Delprado, myself, Cynthia Preby, Kim Congleton, Carrie Carrozza. All of those great resources that you've seen at DynamicsCon at different times are available to talk to you through our drawing. So we'll see you in the chat and we'll see you later on.
Hi, everybody. We're so glad to be here answering your questions related to jobs. I just wanted to point out that we've got lots of free resources available to you through the conference this week, and Mark is going to be posting a link to the drawing that I just mentioned, as well as a few other free resources. So watch for those links in the chat, and you'll have some additional fun things that you can gain access to that we are able to provide. But we have lots of great questions, Rob, that came from everybody as a result of this particular topic, and we've got probably 5 categories of things. So I'm going to group a few things together because we had some people who had some similar questions, but I want to take us back to about halfway through the presentation when you're talking about planning. There were a couple of simple but very important questions about planning. So one of the first questions was related to budgeting. So isn't planning itself means that we are budgeting?
Well, you can have tasks out there and not have a budget out there. So if I just, and again, that's the key, you do have to have the task lines. So I'll give you the example of a time and material job for a moment. You know, we don't necessarily know how much time and material we're going to do. You have to have the task lines out there. So there wouldn't be any budget. It's as you are actually posting to the job that you're actually getting what you're going to be using and what you're going to be billing. But you do get that. So the planning line is where you actually put in what you're budgeting and how much you're expecting to see. And the other thing is I gave the example out there. You don't have to, when you're posting something, if you want to actually import, update the budget itself, it's when you're doing that on the journal line or the document where you can say that the line type. So yes, the answer is if it's a task line, it doesn't have to have a budget until you actually post to it. You're just telling it what you think you're going to do.
Gotcha. Okay. So another question was, why not always do budget and billable? Aren't billable resources also incurring costs that go against internal budgets?
So again, if I've got a fixed price, it doesn't matter. If I've got an overrun, I can't bill that out to my customer. So that would be one major reason why I wouldn't want to do both the billable and budget.
Gotcha. Okay. And another question related to that, can you use a GL budget and apply to a job budget?
So I've had folks using dimensions before. They've tried this. They've got the job tied to a dimension out there. And then when they post to the job itself, it actually posts back into the GL with that dimension on there. But you've got to import it into your, again, depending on how you want to do your reporting. If you actually want to track it in the job itself, I would probably do some kind of partial export from the GL budget and import that into my job budget. But just having it on the job itself doesn't tie back to the GL itself.
Gotcha. Okay. We had a couple questions related to using GL codes. So I'm going to ask you these two because I think you can put them together and answer them in one answer. So one person said GL codes are useful for duties and taxes. So I think you might have a suggestion for something else that could be used for a GL code or instead of a GL code for duties and taxes. And then another person asked about, they said they didn't get the part where we suggested we don't use the GL as a planning line type. So can you explain that concept just a little bit to cover those?
Sure. First of all, I don't recommend if you're only using GL accounts. The first piece is when you're planning, when you go into the planning line and you are using a GL account, that GL account, if you do not have a product posting group on that GL account, it's going to throw an error saying you have to have it on there. But then when you go to calculate WIP, and again, it may be a matter of you never calculate WIP. If you don't calculate WIP, it's not going to throw the error. But that GL account, when you actually post and then try and pull to WIP, it's going to say that GL account can't have a product posting group. So you're kind of darned if you do and darned if you don't. And I'm hoping that at some point that's an improvement that they make to the jobs where you can actually not have to have that product posting group. That goes way back in the day to early Nav about our Navision about why you had to have that on there. Now, going back to why not use just GL accounts for taxes and duties. Well, they're going to be, so I did a presentation back in Focus a couple of years ago about landed costs. And, we have duties and taxes on those types of transactions. On my purchase order, I showed using, because again, I had the modification out there back in the day, I had a resource. That resource was tied to a duty GL account, or it was tied to a taxes GL account. And that way the person putting the purchase order in doesn't have to worry, oh, this is the GL account for taxes, or this is the GL account for duties. I'm buying a resource. I know that resource is my duties. And that's why I would try and get away from using the GL account itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. You'll be happy to hear that at least 2 people who are on the session today have recently implemented jobs or are in the process of implementing jobs. So Kimberly, congratulations on doing that. And she says that she loves the budget and actuals that she can see at a glance. But she also said, while she loves the feature that consumes inventory in the receipt process, she said, we do wish that we could see what was received in the planning lines. Is that something that you can answer for her?
So depending on how you've set up the receipts again, and I like the idea that I mentioned in the presentation where you have a separate warehouse out there, or at least a separate location with a separate bin. And it can be an existing location that you've got out there, but I would set up a separate bin that is going to be just for that job. And I can see and compare going back to actuals versus, again, what's been invoiced and what hasn't been invoiced. And you could probably do something with the value entries to see expected cost versus, or actually just the item ledger entries, expected cost versus actual cost, and know the difference, and just filtering on that particular bin. So that would give them a view of what's been received and what's been invoiced for those jobs.
Gotcha.
Again, focusing on the bin, separate bins for separate jobs.
Right. So that goes right into my next question, which is so interesting. So Terry asked, if you used a bin, would you still link the PO to the job?
Absolutely. Because again, if you don't, it's going to go right into it. All right, let's talk about your options. You don't have to, but if you don't put it to the job, it's then part of your inventory. So now it's not part of the job, and you're going to have to make sure that somebody goes back in again. I like the idea that once I post my invoice, it's right there in the job. So it's a matter of how you want to see it happen.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, good. And Shauna, I saw that you're implementing jobs too. So congratulations. You guys are doing a great job with it, putting that in place. We had a little bit of a conversation going on about if I want to post WIP on a different account and dimension, is that possible? And so there was some conversation going on about how it's based on the posting setup. So can you talk about how that might be possible to post to a different account and dimension other than maybe the one piece that you have set up?
I don't think too much in terms of dimensions. I think more about the GL accounts and the posting setups. But depending on how you want to do it, if I had multiple departments that I needed to track the job for, I might actually set up different jobs and link the jobs together to get them to different dimensions. The dimensions that when you run WIP, it's going to post to the GL account with the dimensions from the job. So if you've got multiple jobs posting to WIP, you're going to run into a little problem with how am I evaluating that. So maybe you want to have separate jobs out there by job by department for the job. But that's an interesting thing that maybe down the road we could put a request in that based on phases or based on something in the task lines, we could have different dimensions or set up the dimensions by task line.
Right. Yeah, no, that is interesting. Okay, I've got 2 more questions for you, and the questions are getting harder and harder as we go, Rob. So I'm, checking to see how you're doing under pressure here. So David asked, many customers inquire about more PM functionality, like a tool such as Basecamp or Asana or MS Project. What is the discussion that you have with clients that are using jobs and projects in BC, and they want more visuals or tools to improve managing and scheduling resources across many jobs and projects?
So I'm fortunate that we have a lot of other tools within BC now, such as Jet Reports or Power BI. And just to show how old school I am, I still use Access to tie databases together. So I could link those 2 tables together, and we've done that with a couple of clients where they've actually used Power BI to access other data from other like the MS Project. To pull in different things. So again, there's extra tools out there now that give you that flexibility.
Yeah, and I would add on to that too that a lot of times we're talking about some separate functionality with project management and the actual invoicing and tracking of the accounting related to a job, right? So those different tools have some slightly different purposes, and while we'd love to have a perfect solution for all of that in one place, I don't think anybody's really come up with it yet. So here's another really good hard question. Is there a good way to manage the subcontracting process? It would seem that BC has a gap around subcontract management where the order has to leave and come back for subassembly.
Other than, again, using the, again, you have that, what is it, the AP to GL reconcile. And again, if you're using resources as opposed to GL accounts, knowing the separate vendors, you have a separate resource for each vendor that's out for subassembly. That's probably the best way to do that. And again, maybe some Power BI stuff with a control that's out there saying, hey, I've got these POs out there for somebody else. Here's how I'm going to link them. But again, separate resources, separate. In fact, I think that's what I did back with one company was we had a separate resource for each outside labor.
Right. Yep. No, and that's often one of those hallway conversations we have. Talk about subcontracting and how we can actually deal with that. So it's not the first time that people have asked that question for sure.
Terry, I just wish this was live because there are so many great questions out here.
Yeah.
I'd like to be able to say, hey, this is what I've done or this is what I've seen. And it's one of those things where you've been around long enough, you've seen a whole bunch of different things.
Right. So you've got about 60 seconds to answer this last question. I know that you and I very often talk about the improvements that you've seen with jobs over the years. So what's your top 3, the ones that you're just really excited about?
Well, I guess the first one has to be the visibility that when you're on a job card, you can see the task lines. I mean, back in the day, you had to click on a button, like I said in the presentation, and then you brought it back up. This way, you see all your phases, tasks, and lines all together, or planning lines all together, right there on the job card itself. And then the next thing would be reversing WIP. I've run into that problem so many times in the past. So I like the fact that they've said, hey, now we can do that. And then obviously the project manager role center, the visibility. Back in the day, when I was a consultant showing people how to do stuff, that was one thing. But then when I was actually having to manage them in a prior life, it was like I had to go out to each job and take a look at each job. And like you saw on that role center, I had a job that was past due or over budget. And it's like, wow, that flags me right then and there. As soon as I sign in the morning, what happened last night or what happened yesterday? Or, those types of things are just really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you guys have more questions for Rob and you're looking for more information about job planning, you can certainly come and visit us in our booth. So the NewView Strategies booth is available outside in the sponsor area. So, and all of us are checking back there today and tomorrow still. So if you have further questions for any of our presenters, but particularly with Rob on all of his incredible expertise with jobs, feel free to visit us there. And hopefully
especially people who are new to implementing jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. Because getting that set up is the key, right? Got to get that right in the start. So otherwise, take a look in the chat for some of the resources that Mark pasted there for you for other free things that are available. And don't forget to enter our drawing.
Bye, everybody. Thank you again. Thank you again, DynamicsCon.